Of the Leadership Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this first Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast of the new millennium. We live in interesting times. A new administration is coming in. There are rather more conservatives than many had expected in the new cabinet. But the obvious and understandable target of all of the left now is the Attorney General designate, Senator John Ashcroft, and the left says they are really going to give him a hard time. They are going to ask him some really tough questions, and so help me. The really tough question that they plan to pose to him is, will you enforce the laws of the United States? It is particularly interesting that that is the question which they want to ask him, which would ordinarily not be a tough question, but in these times and with this recent history, it's an open question as to whether or not the Attorney General will enforce the laws. So we're all looking forward to some more interesting times in the immediate future. We have the report in for the Institute for the year 2000, the raw numbers in any case. Last year we held 154 schools, which compares to, I think, 116, which was our previous record. And we set a new record for training, numbers of students trained. Last year, 3,524 students. You have before you there at the tables our current 2001 school schedule, so you can plan the burden it is on our staff to have to go twice to Hawaii. One thing Matt said reminded me that conservatives are very suspicious types. Many of you here are Leadership Institute donors, and you will recall that last year Helen sent a fundraising letter on behalf of the Institute around one of our house file mailings, and I got a letter that started off very nice from one of our donors, a lady elsewhere, not in this room, and she started saying nice things, and then you could tell that innate conservative suspicion was coming out. And she says, "Oh, I just got to be thinking, you're writing this letter. Is this just an excuse to put you on the Leadership Institute payroll, Mrs. Blackwell?" And when Matt announced that people interested in this coming weekend's grassroots school here in the village could contact Helen and I, it occurred to me that there might be a suspicious sort of person somewhere in this audience, and let me assure you that Helen is not a paid staffer on the Leadership Institute. Helen is the Virginia chair of, Virginia president, chairman, president of the Eagle Forum, and she is conspired with our staff to put together this school which is going to bring a lot of fine people from all around Virginia. But that's how that happened. But Helen is not on, never has been, and does not anticipate ever being on the payroll of the Leadership Institute. To introduce our speaker, I present to you Genevieve Wood. She is the outstanding director of our Center for Print and Broadcast Media. Prior to joining the Institute, she was Deputy Press Secretary at the Republican National Committee and worked in television news, America's Voice, and NBC News. She came here as an intern originally, and then was on as an employee, and then went off in her desire to get a lot of television experience, was publicity director for NBC News in New York, which was an astonishing thing for her to have. Genevieve came back here 8 or 9 months later for a visit, and I asked her how she liked it in the Big Apple, and she says, well, it was pretty remarkable. She said, I knew there would be culture shock. I didn't realize quite how different the climate would be. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she says, well, when I got there, I started to look around for an appropriate church to attend, and I started asking my fellow employees at NBC News to recommend a church, and nobody recommended a church, and she says, I have yet to find anybody in the whole place who attends church. But she found a church there, and we're happy that she found her way back with us here. Most recently, Genevieve has signed on to co-host with Marion Barry, yes, that Marion Barry, on the New Renaissance Network in an operation together with Armstrong Williams, who has spoken here. So to introduce our speaker, Genevieve Wood.
And depending on how things go with Marion Barry, I may be calling upon our speaker this morning to help me out with a few things. It's proof that the networks have plenty of time on their hands if they can give somebody like myself and Marion Barry a full hour to talk about whatever we want, take phone calls and the like. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks, and hopefully some of you will be able to catch it. Well, if there's one group in Washington that maybe outnumbers political pundits that you see on the TVs every night, it may be lawyers and attorneys. And many of them, I'm sure you've gotten to know over the years, especially the last couple of years, by watching many of them on TV, especially during the impeachment trial. Everybody on, it seemed, had either attorney under their name or former U.S. trial attorney. I had no idea there were so many former U.S. trial attorneys. Some of them had good things to say. Some of them didn't seem to understand the Constitution very well. But nonetheless, they were all on. And one of my favorite attorneys who was on was our speaker this morning, Mark Levin. And Mark always had the right words to say. He always put it to the other side. And he always seemed to do it with seriousness, because it was a serious matter. But he had an element of humor about him, and I really think had a good nature that really reached a lot of people out there. I wish everybody on our side who's on television was as good at delivering the message as Mark is. Mark, as you know, is the president of the Landmark Legal Foundation. He has served in several cabinet departments in this country under President Reagan. He was both at the Education Department, also at Interior, and he served as Chief of Staff to the Attorney General. So I know he's got a lot of interesting insights to share for us and for the cameras this morning, and we welcome now Mark Levin.
Of course, one of the people I used to enjoy watching was Genevieve.
See, that's the way it works.
That's right. First of all, a word on Morton Blackwell and his lovely wife. I thank God for this man every day. What he has done, I used to be a lot younger, believe it or not, in the Reagan administration, and Morton was one of the guys I would talk to, right, Morton? When we thought we had problems then. Boy. And you'll be glad to know that today Hillary Clinton's being sworn in as United States Senator of New York, which explains why people are leaving New York. Bill Clinton changed the license tag, you probably heard, on the presidential limousine. It says taxation without representation. And that's his way of showing brotherhood with the people in the District of Columbia who want 2 senators. And I'm going to suggest to President Bush that he change the license tag on Clinton's post-president limousine to high crimes and misdemeanors. What do you think? Just so nobody ever forgets. I'm going to bounce around and hit a lot of subjects because there's a lot of things that are on my mind today, and unfortunately for you, you get to hear them. And we'll be happy to take questions, I suppose, at the end. I want to talk about Senator Ashcroft for a moment. Senator Ashcroft obviously hails from Missouri. Landmark Legal Foundation its headquarters is in Missouri. At one point, Senator Kit Bond was president of Landmark years ago. Now, I'm not here to talk about Landmark, but I am here to talk a little bit about the law and the Constitution And we can get into politics, too, a little bit. But I see something happening in the Ashcroft case that I've seen before, and people need to be aware of this. The hard, left-wing, shrill, ambulance-chasing protester types are opposed to Mr. Ashcroft. That should get your attention in and of itself. Why are they opposed to this man? And then I hear, oh, don't worry, he's from the Senate. They're likely to confirm him. They always confirm their own. And I remember right before the Bob Bork proceedings, I heard the same thing. Oh, they're not going to stop Bork. They're just going to, some tough questions for the man. The left is out to stop this man, and they're going to do everything they can to do it. This is not beanbag. This is very serious. And John Ashcroft is in a line of great men and women who've been mistreated like this by the left. They go in front of the cameras and they talk about their disgust with the politics of personal destruction, but that's all they have, and they have perfected this. And they did it to Bork and to Thomas. And I know it's controversial, but I'll say it, and to John Tower. And a host of other Reagan people at mid-level. William Bradford Reynolds, who headed the Civil Rights Division, for instance. I can tell you, we, for one, are not going to stand by and allow this to occur without a fight. And that's what I'm here to urge, that you folks do the same thing. Understand what's going on. Let's talk about this case of Ronnie White, the Missouri Supreme Court Justice, who for some reason has become the cause celeb of this movement against Ashcroft. It is the most base, disgusting, race-baiting, and you knew it would happen at some point, because as soon as Ronnie White was rejected by the Republican-controlled Senate for a lifetime federal judgeship, it was Bill Clinton who immediately claimed that the Republican Senate was racist, and he did it more than once. He did it a couple of times in a period of a week. I know because I wrote about it at the time. I'm going to talk to you about one case, and then I'll get on to some of these other agencies. It's the state of Missouri versus a fellow named Johnson. Now, Johnson, there was a family dispute. He was very physical with his wife, abusive, and his wife's daughter. And a neighbor called during one of these incidents, and a deputy sheriff came to the house. He talked to the family. Everybody said everything's okay. Deputy sheriff turned around to walk to his car, and he was shot twice in the back, including the back of the head. Johnson goes back into his house. He hears the deputy sheriff moaning on the ground. He goes up to the deputy sheriff and shoots him in the forehead. Kills him, obviously. The guy takes his substantial cache of guns and ammunition, including semi-automatic weapons, and he drives off to the sheriff's house. And they're celebrating Christmas, and he unloads his weapon through the bay window where the sheriff's family is, and kills the sheriff's wife. She's hit 5 times, and she dies in front of the family. Then he drives to the sheriff's office, because he figures that law enforcement's going to gather there and search for him, and he lies in wait. I'm just cutting to the details here. There's more, but I'm just trying to make clear what's going on here. He shoots through a window and hits somebody else, and then another sheriff or deputy sheriff, as he's leaving, he shoots him in the head and kills him right on the spot. And then a deputy sheriff drives up to the place, not knowing what's going on. She gets out of the passenger side, shoots her through the heart, and she dies on the pavement. That's 3 peace officers and 1 wife, all dead, killed in cold blood. They eventually apprehend this man, and he does what all criminals, convicted capital murderers do. He said he had ineffective counsel, that there was Mark, how are you, sir? There was prosecutorial misconduct, and he was insane due to his service in Vietnam. Now, this is garden variety stuff in terms of what these death row guys do. My counsel didn't protect me, the prosecution's abusive, and besides, I served in Vietnam and I lost my mind. So he was convicted of 4 first-degree capital murders and sentenced to death in each instance. So this case works its way to the Missouri Supreme Court, and all the justices but one uphold the convictions in the death sentence. Now, understand this murderer Johnson said primarily the reason why he didn't have good counsel was because of a couple of facts. For instance, this so-called perimeter defense argument. What is it? There was a rope around the garage with tin cans tied to it. Johnson's counsel in his opening statement said that showed he had this military problem, military complex, mental disease, post-traumatic syndrome. And more evidence of that, his lawyer said, was that the tires in his car were flattened so that the enemy out there, the Viet Cong, wouldn't come and take his car. Well, the prosecution quickly unraveled that because it was a state trooper who put a rope around the garage with a tin can to make sure that if he tried to leave, they'd hear him. And it was another state trooper who flattened the tires in the car so he couldn't get away. Now, Johnson said, if my lawyers had bothered to question those witnesses, they would have known not to make that argument. I never told them that, and he even said that on the stand. I never said anything about tin cans and flat tires and all the rest of it. So he said that was error, and it should have been reversed because I didn't have effective counsel. Well, the majority on the Missouri Supreme Court said, no, that's not what happened exactly. I mean, yes, your lawyer should have been better and should have done those things, but you had your day in court. Your problem was the raw facts of the case, and your theory is not fitting the raw facts of the case. You murdered these people. You gave a confession. You gave exquisite detail of what you did, how far away ex-deputy sheriff was, how you laid in wait, all these other things. And in your confession, you only mentioned your service in Vietnam once, and you didn't mention it in the context of a mental problem. And besides, at trial, you had experts up there supporting your position. They never mentioned this perimeter defense issue or anything else. So no, you had your fair day in court, more than one, and they upheld the convictions in the death penalty. Well, Ronnie White dissented. And Ronnie White said, no, he didn't. And I would reverse and send it back for a new trial. Because while the jury didn't find, he said, that he met the legal test for insanity, obviously the man went mad. Why else would he kill all these people? And obviously that's something that he should be able to defend on. Bill Clinton nominated Ronnie White to a lifetime appointment on the federal bench. John Ashcroft said no way. John Ashcroft fought to stop him. And his Republican colleagues voted with him. So Ronnie White now disperses injustice within the borders of Missouri, but not for the rest of us, thank God. Now you can understand why the left wing doesn't want to defend the merits of their candidate. They're running around saying 41 times or whatever, some absurd number, Ronnie White has upheld the death penalty, which is more than some of Ashcroft's people. Now, we have sitting here today Dr. Mark Cannon, who was administrative assistant to one of the finest Chief Justices of the United States, Warren Burger. those could have been minor procedural issues. It could have been the same guy 15 times going up to the Supreme Court. Who knows? But I know this case, and this is enough. So when people go out and they say that John Ashcroft opposed Ronnie White because he's black, or when people are saying this is a civil rights issue, I say this is a victims' rights issue. I say this is a law and order issue. And I hope that Senator Hatch invites the victims' families to testify at John Ashcroft's hearing, and those family members look these senators in the eye and say, we don't think Ronnie White was qualified to be promoted to a lifetime federal judgeship either. And I hope that Senator Hatch invites some of the law enforcement people, some of the peace officers who had to pick up their brother's bodies and their sister's body and had to carry their coffin during their funeral. I hope they invite them to testify about the qualifications of Ronnie White to be promoted to a lifetime appointment on the federal bench. You see, they want this to be about race and civil rights, but they're lying. It's not about race and civil rights. John Ashcroft has voted for 26 out of 28 black nominees to serve on the federal bench. He appointed the first, as governor, black judge on the appellate court in Missouri. The idea that this has anything to do with race is unconscionable. So I view this as an opportunity. Let's discuss Ronnie White in front of the TV cameras and in front of the public. And let's make Senator Leahy and Senator Biden, who go home and talk tough on crime, let's have them explain why they embrace these left-wing, way out of the mainstream candidates for these federal judgeships. Bill Clinton likes to take credit for the reduction in crime. Well, it's no thanks to his judges, and it's no thanks to his nominees. Now, since when is it controversial in this country to nominate conservatives to cabinet positions? And the media immediately runs to all these Democrat all these special interest groups that are appendages to the Democratic Party and gets their comment when George Bush nominates somebody. Linda Chavez, terrific lady. John Sweeney doesn't like her. Who cares what John Sweeney likes? Gail Norton, nominated at Interior. The Sierra Club doesn't like her. Well, that's why I do like her. John Ashcroft. NARAL doesn't like him. Oh, my God. Well, then he's unqualified. There should be no mistake about this, that having lost the election, that these folks are now trying to influence our governance in Washington. So the fight is not over. It's just begun. So I wanted to make that real clear. I don't know how much time I have. I want to hit a couple more.
You got about 15 minutes.
All right. Now, let me talk a little bit about law and order in the federal government. By the way, if nobody's Attorney General, that place, the integrity will increase by 100-fold just by the fact that Giannarino's not there. The EPA, over there, the EPA, the Forest Service, are issuing regulations right up to the last minute as fast as they can. This is considered part of the Clinton legacy. Government by fiat is considered part of the Clinton legacy. Remember, I usually carry my Constitution with me. Genevieve, I did all through that impeachment period. Now, the very first section of the United States Constitution, Article 1, that talks about the role of Congress. I can find it. I have all the impeachment sections memorized for some reason. Article 1, Section 1. all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Is there any confusion about that? Now, since FDR's time, and even a little bit before, we have these regulatory agencies where powers delegated. I don't agree with all that, but that's the nature of the beast. There they are. And these agencies and departments are spewing out regulations every day. They're in something called a Federal Register. It's thousands and thousands of pages long, and in many cases you're obligated under all those regulations, and you probably violate one or two of them every day and don't know that you are. And not to get too philosophical, this is precisely what Alexis de Tocqueville was warning about, and what he saw so great about the United States is we didn't bog ourselves down in all these rules and so forth. Well, we are. And we are now nationalizing areas of our country and eliminating private conduct on federal lands, all through the bureaucracy, or through presidential executive orders, or through the 1906 Antiquities Act. Now, you know, the framers did the best they could to set up a government of limited, divided powers. They were well aware of people like Bill Clinton. And that's why they did what they did. The Constitution's a beautiful document. But it's up to us to make sure that it's complied with. Now, you know, people like Rush Limbaugh have said this, and let me repeat this, because I think it's very important. When the United States Senate failed to hold a real impeachment trial and failed to remove the President of the United States for high crimes and misdemeanors, that's when all the checks and balances on him ceased to exist. He had no more fear. There was nothing the Senate could do to him, or the House for that matter. There was nobody who was going to stop him issuing whatever he wanted to issue. And so we've had the last 2 years really many ways a lawless and certainly a reckless president. And what I fear is that the precedent this is setting for future presidents. I mean, don't get me wrong. Most people who run for president are extremely honorable, good people. So it doesn't. But the limitations and the checks and balances are there for the people who aren't. And we always should keep in mind that these people are supposed to represent us. They are our servants, and not the other way around. Now, Bill Clinton, through his EPA and through the Forest Service and the FDA and some of the other agencies, is actually legislating out of the executive branch. You know, executive orders in the past were really intended to apply statutes that have already been passed to the executive branch. And now, look how far we've come. And by the way, there is a great book that's going to come out in March, because I read the raw transcript and put my little blurb on it, by David Limbaugh, Rush's brother. It's going to be called Absolute Power. It is a meticulously researched, frightening portrayal, case after case, of what this Justice Department and this president did. You might say, I've heard it all. No, you haven't. This really delves into it in a very thorough way. It's very scary. The IRS is another agency out of control, not just in terms of the way it audits people, but in the lawsuit that we brought, now is on appeal. Over 200 members of Congress asked the IRS to audit nonprofit groups. Now, while we succeeded in getting their names, and the Wall Street Journal published them on their editorial page one day, what they wouldn't give us is the names of the organizations that they targeted. That's what's on appeal. This isn't supposed to be happening. politicians aren't supposed to try and squelch free speech and association that way. I mean, there are cases like the Buddhist temple where they ought to lose their tax status if they're involved in criminal activity or political activity. But members of the House shouldn't be able to launch through the IRS investigations of people they disagree with. You know, that used to shock people. Doesn't seem to shock too many people anymore. And then finally, let me just hit one other thing. I told you I was going to bounce around. Clinton signed the other day something, a treaty called for some kind of a world criminal court. And at first I thought that's a pretty good idea because that means he can't escape the United States without being prosecuted. But then I thought further, and I mean, can you imagine? He signs this thing and then tells Bush, you know, don't really implement it, and he urges the Senate, don't pass the treaty until it's fixed. So what did he do? What he did was he gave United States prestige to an outrageous act. Our supreme law is the United States Constitution. Now, exactly this World Criminal Court, exactly what law is it going to apply, and against whom? And do we have our Bill of Rights when we're dragged before some tribunal? And who's going to sit on this court? The Chief Justice of Botswana? The Chief Justice of France? I mean, who? How is this going to work? And then the President said in announcing this, that this is in the fine tradition of the Nuremberg trials and so forth. No, it's not. The Nuremberg trials were set up to prosecute criminals, murderous criminals from a murderous criminal regime. We're none of that. And of course the fear is, as Jesse Helm said yesterday, that they're going to drag our soldiers in front of this court when they don't like what we've done. Well, what kind of president signs something like this? Same president who puts that license tag on his car. So, I don't know about you, but on January 20th, I'm not just going to be celebrating the fact that Bush is coming in. I'm speaking for myself now. I'm going to be celebrating that he's leaving. And Bush is much kinder than I am. It took Clinton 5 weeks to and his GSA head to give the money for the transition of the Bush administration coming in. But you know, that works both ways. President Clinton has his own transition out, and I would withhold his money for 5 weeks just to, fair is fair. But anyway, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mark said he'd take a few questions.
Okay.
One of the things that I've seen in this transition or the last 2 years that I've never seen in any other presidential or national event is the discussion of a presidential legacy. Why are we discussing a legacy of somebody that's in office when we never did before? You know, they served, they did what they did, and then after they were gone, then we talked about what they left behind that was good or bad. Is it the press that's pushed this issue of legacy, or has it been both the press and the current administration that are trying to make this something bigger?
Well, I don't think we've had many presidents who in their last 2 years of office are talking about their legacy and are spending time focused on their legacy. Most people come into an office like that, and they're very busy trying to do things to help their country. So there's really nothing left to be said about this guy. I mean, he's concerned about his legacy. He's creating that $125 million Clinton Library and Policy Center. You know, the Reagan Library, which had been the most expensive, was like $55 million. I don't know exactly why it's $125 million, but there you go. So obviously legacy is very important. I mean, he sent people to lobby for a Nobel Peace Prize. This is what we're talking about. So that's why we talk about legacy. But we all know what his legacy is going to be, no matter how hard he works at changing it. Yes, sir.
Yes. Mark, you pointed out very eloquently that the hard labor is out to get Ashcroft, and we shouldn't underestimate their ability and organizing power. What is being done on our side to lobby for this nomination, for this confirmation, and what do you suggest be done that isn't being done?
Well, I suggest we do exactly what I said. We counter the effort to turn this into a Bork-Thomas Tower hearing, and we bring those families in, and we bring those law enforcement officers in. And rather than always being in the fetal position, in the back of the hearing room, we go up front and we say, you stand for liberal activist judges who care more about the criminal, who don't think about the 3 law enforcement officers who were killed and a wife who was killed. We think about the victims and law and order. Don't let them get away with falsely characterizing what this hearing is about. John Ashcroft stands for what we stand for. They defeat him, they defeat us. Now they understand that. And the American people are with us. They favor the death penalty. They favor law and order. And they favor the Constitution being interpreted as it's written. So I think what we do is we boldly say what we stand for, and then we explain what the other side stands for. And if Senator Leahy wants to defend himself, great. If Senator Biden, who goes home in Delaware and campaigns as a victims' rights senator, law and order, pro-death penalty, well, how can he possibly endorse Ronnie White? That's what we do. We show a little courage. That's all it takes. These people, not that they'll back down, but when they're in a fight, let's put it to you this way, they need to be in a couple more fights. We should not allow our best and brightest to die on these political battlefields. Enough is enough. Yes, sir. Mark Cannon.
Mark, first of all, do you know if Senator Hedge has been approached on that idea?
No idea.
Second,
Maybe I'll call over there today.
good, let's both do it.
Yeah.
The second, do you think that Ashcroft or citizens in his behalf could have successfully, legally demanded a certificate of election?
In other words, the fact that
He clearly had the highest number of votes of all eligible voters.
in other words, yeah, right. The deceased opponent obviously wasn't an inhabitant of the state anymore. Probably could have. I haven't done a lot of research on it, but it seems pretty clear in the Constitution. But there again, Mark, you know, he's credited Ashcroft with being very gracious and not fighting. Let the other side be called gracious,
Yeah, right.
and let us keep fighting.
Yeah, let's keep fighting. Third
Yes,
question,
sir.
quickly. Clinton just appointed a black judge to the Fourth Circuit.
Right.
On interim appointment. As Jiffy pointed out in his article in the Washington Times, this is a violation of the Constitution.
Yes, it is.
Do you think that case could be won in court, or is it possible for somebody to pursue it?
Well, here's the problem. Unless we have taken a number of cases, as have other legal groups, claiming that the powers of Congress under the Constitution have been usurped by the executive branch. They've mostly dealt with property rights cases. And in every case, the Supreme Court says, this is a political matter, and you don't have standing. And in one brief we wrote, and if Congress wants to do something about it, it can do something about it. In our last brief, we took a unique position, and we said, Congress doesn't have the power to divest itself of its constitutional authority. Period. We don't care how many votes they have for it. And the executive branch doesn't have the constitutional power to usurp Congress. And if the Supreme Court exists for anything, it exists to help play traffic cop on these issues. It's not a political issue. It's a fundamentally constitutional issue, and it's rejected at every time. So a group like us couldn't raise, or any citizen, and if Congress wants to do something about it, all they need to do is make sure a year from now that, there's a lot of weapons they have, although 50-50 it's tough. But, and Imhoff tried it from Oklahoma, but he wasn't backed up by a lot, which is, okay, your next 10 candidates don't get, we're not going to even pay attention to them. And a year or two ago, the rug was pulled out from under Imhoff's feet, and that threat ceased to exist. So again, if you're not going to stand up and fight a guy like Clinton, there's no reason for him to pay any attention to you. Yes, sir.
Mark, you hit right on the mark with your point, with John Ashcroft. I don't know how many of you watched the Valera report last night, but there was a lady on there representing the NAACP, and it was almost disgusting to watch her, because she had a fire in her belly and her eyes and everything else. She had total hatred for John Ashcroft. And I thought, how obscene that particular scene was, because it indicated that sort of a very heavy bias. But the reason I bring this up is that when you have 80-90% of the black vote, going for Gore, the question is, what can we do? Because my black friends don't think that way. What can we do as a group to try to break that down? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, I don't. This is one area where I'm very, very discouraged. I'll be honest with you. I'm very, very concerned. The anointed leadership is totally irresponsible. And the NAACP has proved this last election that it's an appendage of the Democratic Party. I'm very worried about it, and there's got to be a way where we can communicate with minorities, blacks, Hispanics, all minorities, without having to go through these self-anointed spokespeople. Because I'm a believer, a firm believer, that conservatism, liberty, capitalism, all those things are human rights. And I hear people say we need to do a better job communicating. Well, there also needs to be a better job at listening. And I don't know how we do that. I'll leave it to political geniuses like Morton, since this really isn't my area. But I'm concerned about it too. I'm very discouraged by it. And by the way, I think it really hurts that community, because you look at Clinton's outreach to the black community. It was non-existent. It was non-existent. This license tag stuff. It's offensive, and it should be. He does it with 3-4 weeks left in his term. This guy is a guy who, if you believe in it, he's not a guy who battled for 2 senators and a congressman from the District of Columbia. He decided not to do that. Yes, ma'am.
I really appreciate what you shared. It's been so wonderful to hear it, and I'm glad that your experience gives you the credibility. How do we
I don't know about that, but yeah.
How do we get back to being able to really have teeth in the word traitor? Because I think we're dealing with an issue that's un-American.
Right.
Jesse Jackson, self-appointed diplomat, other, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, there have been people, hotheads, and people who try and rally using the wrong kinds of tactics since the beginning of time, and since the founding of the United States, for that matter. But I will tell you this, as to your issue of how do we basically enforce the law and so forth. Bill Clinton committed federal crimes. He was held in contempt by a federal judge. And if you read her ruling, she said basically, and I paraphrase, I'm holding him in civil contempt because there's a criminal investigation going on now, and I don't want there to be a double jeopardy issue. And I'll bet you $5 that independent counsel Robert Ray does not indict Bill Clinton. He hasn't shown any courage since that I can see, and I'm going public with this for the first time. I've always defended these independent counsels, especially Ken Starr. I think he was under brutal assault. We can all second guess him, but we weren't in his shoes. But this guy, you know, he's issuing reports, he's cleaning up his office, he's blah, blah, blah. I tell you, my first witness in a case against Clinton would be Judge Susan Weber Wright, and I'd have her explain her contempt findings. And in there she says, intentionally provided false testimony. It doesn't have to be perjury. You know, I hear all these liberals out there saying, well, it has to be material and blah, blah, blah. Well, obstruction doesn't have to be material. And secondly, she specifically put in a footnote directed at people like Lanny Davis, I didn't say that it was immaterial. Meaning, why do you keep saying that I said it was immaterial? That's for perjury. And she held him in contempt, that it went unchallenged. He paid his fine. And so it's not a complicated case. It's just that is this man going to have the guts to bring charges against the President of the United States? Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think that Jaworski would have had the guts to bring charges against Richard Nixon? I don't think there's any question about it. Why do you think Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon? Because obviously, he not only wanted to get it behind him, but it meant he was potentially a target of a prosecution. Now, Bill Clinton, I don't care, you know, they say private conduct. You know, all crimes surround private conduct. When you rob a bank, that's private conduct. Or personal conduct. When you commit battery, that's personal conduct. It's not public conduct. It's all personal conduct. When you lie on your tax returns, when you lie to a grand jury, there's no distinction. So, if Bill Clinton is not held accountable after he leaves office, and I know this is so terribly controversial, then we got problems, because that means the rule of law did not win the day. And I've got to leave. I thank you all very, very much, and more. Thank you.
Yes, I can tell you that when I first met Mark more than 20 years ago, we saw eye to eye on many things, and we have had over the years many fine conversations and plotted and schemed for many good things. And I will tell you that in my judgment, Mark is a national treasure, and I am so happy that he has his own organization now, and he does so much good. And I thank you for all that you do for our country, Mark. I also was pleased to see that Mark came in today wearing an Adam Smith tie, and we're very, very happy to do that. That Amy Green designed, and here, ladies and gentlemen, is the latest Adam Smith tie that Amy Green designed. And if you go on the tour, after this event, Amy could probably find a copy of this brand new tie. This, incidentally, was made at the request of none other than former Attorney General Ed Meese, your old boss. He told us he wanted a new green tie, and we came up with this. So this is the Meese model of the Adam Smith tie. You notice at your table that we provided you with a preview copy of our congressional handbook, and as soon as we get the office numbers, etc., in the new edition will be out. But we found last year that this little handbook was quite useful. A lot of people liked it, and so we are providing it for you again this year. I'd like to invite you all to join us on Wednesday, February 7th. Our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast speaker is going to be Brent Bozell, and you will all be excited to hear what he has to say.